It's only because there was a court case about it that anything continued at all. The secularists, who were in those days in the media omnipresent, it was a difficult moment in the whole evolution towards rebuilding the temple. All these people are in jail and so on, and there was the crackdown happening. The media did their best to put the blame on Advani. He was not in it at all. Everybody knew, of course, there has been a temple there. You see, there was this completely artificial case made by the so-called eminent historians that there had not been a temple there. Now, of course, there was a temple there. He took an afternoon nap and he didn't want to be disturbed, and then, he woke up when it had been demolished. And that was exactly what he wanted. So as a Hindu, he wanted the mosque to be replaced with a temple. And as a Congress leader, he wanted the BJP to be on the defensive. RSS officers tried to stop them.
Hari Om Tat Sat. Namaste everyone to the very first podcast of the Center for Indic Studies in Indus University. As some of you already know, that the Center for Indic Studies is one of the premium institutes propagating the Indian knowledge systems. And I'm your host Tirtha, and today we are going to conduct a podcast with Dr. Koenraad Elst. And today we are going to talk about Ayodhya afterwards and what we see the future post the Ayodhya verdict. So Dr. Koenraad Elst, namaste. Dr. Koenraad Elst is one of the foremost scholars working in India and on Indian knowledge systems. His expertise is on the socio-political study of the culture, and he is one of the pioneers whose documentations have helped immensely into getting the Ayodhya verdict in favor of the Ram Janmabhoomi. So with that small introduction, because Koenraad Elst doesn't require that much of an introduction in larger sense. So with that introduction, we are going to begin. So namaste once again, sir. And thank you for joining me in this podcast. So as I mentioned, we're going to discuss about Ayodhya in today's podcast. So I begin, since you are from the West, you are here for I think 35 or 40 years now. And you have been working here on Indic, you can say socio-political structures. So I begin by asking you, can we call the demolition of Babri synonymous to the fall of Bastille in Europe? Because the fall of Bastille had a significant and symbolical aspect to the French Revolution. Similarly, the demolition of Babri, it brought about the Indic Renaissance and the unity that was needed amongst the Hindu people of this land. So can we just equate the demolition of Babri to that of the fall of Bastille?
Well, starting out with the demolition in 1992, which was a halfway station between the whole the riots and so on about the place on the one hand, and on the other hand the ultimate excavations and then decision by the court and then finally building and inaugurating the building. So that demolition is really a very uncharacteristic event. To start with that, fits entirely in the secularist discourse of trying to criminalize the whole enterprise of rebuilding the temple. that there has been this Lieberhan committee and so on. They've tried to make a whole issue of accusing certain people, incidentally people like Advani who had nothing to do with the demolition. But even, whether right or wrong, it's the wrong emphasis. You see, this was just a temple that Hindus wanted to rebuild, and they had a right to do so. Now, whether it was like the storming of the Bastille in Paris in 1789.
Yes.
Interesting comparison, of course. I'd say no, because the storming of the Bastille was the beginning of something big, something world historical, whereas I haven't seen much of a sequel to that demolition. On the contrary, the Hindu movement was in some serious trouble after that. There was a crackdown, and the Hindu politicians, pulled their hands off. It's only because there was a court case about it that anything continued at all. Because at the political level, nothing continued. And so that comparison, I think, is not the right one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was just to start the discourse, initial discourse.
Yeah, I mean, nothing against your question. And I mean, it's a good question in the sense that it allows for a very clear answer. So yes, you see, our understanding of the whole affair has already advanced considerably. This much we already know, that this is an event that has a certain importance in its own right, but is not significant for a larger evolution.
So you don't really sense that the demolition of Babri, as I call it, or let's say, was a cause that united the Hindus in India. Don't you see like that?
No, I think quite a few Hindus thought of themselves or had been convinced by the secularists who were in those days in the media omnipresent that this shouldn't have happened this way, even if at some point the temple was to be rebuilt. They didn't like this chaos. And, I myself also thought this was not the ideal way of doing this. But you see, if nothing else is allowed, then maybe it's necessary. So, you should see it in proportion. It's not perfect. It's not the thing that we all dreamed of. But then again, maybe it was necessary. At any rate, it was a difficult moment in the whole evolution towards rebuilding the temple.
Okay. So, since you mentioned about that moment, you were here.
Well, during the demolition, I was on the airplane coming here. I didn't know what to expect, I didn't know this. So when I arrived, I heard, all these people are in jail and so on, and there was the crackdown happening. So that was interesting. It was cute. I was invited underground by K.S. Sudarshan, who was then not yet the Sarsanga Chalak. Anyway, he wanted to speak to me. He wanted to hear what, foreign voices had to comment on it. So it was all very adventurous, you see, on the back of a motorcycle to somewhere in an underground garage and then change over in a car. And it was all very suspense, And so then we talked, and he was quite as clueless as most people. So he just was, trying to figure out what exactly to do now. Anyway, I mean, many of their choices had been made for them. There was this crackdown already. Many of his colleagues were in prison. And he himself also later, when he became the Sarsangachalak, was still looking for, and there are even rumors that he wanted to convert to Islam and stuff like that. So I would not say that he was a guide in difficult times. And I think that is true for many people in the RSS movement. So their actions were largely dictated by circumstances and so on. They didn't have their heart very much in it. And that's why the leadership at that time was not taken by them. You see, the only political leader who really squarely was behind the Karsevaks who did the demolition was Bal Thackeray. And in the RSS leadership, certainly not one of the politicians, like L.K. Advani, absolutely not. You see, the media did their best to put the blame on Advani. He was not in it at all. He was very surprised. And but so there was one RSS leader who was squarely behind it. It was Moropant Pingle. I mean, if anyone still doesn't know, Moropant Pingle is the name. I also know a few names of people who did the groundwork, you see, who prepared the engineering of how to demolish. And so they gave a lead to the boys, whose job was very simple. It was an old building. It was not very much anymore, so it was fairly easy to take down once you knew, you see, at which points you have to, pull and make it come down. But those names I'm not going to say. In principle, already since 1992, I'm not saying this, because I think it's the job of Indian journalists to find that out. I mean, this is a pretty ridiculous situation. You see me with, I know only some, broken Hindi, and you see, I arrived there from a distant country, totally unprepared. You see, I make 2-3 phone calls, and I have the answer. I know exactly how the demolition went. Now, any of the thousands of journalists who had landed on Delhi at that moment, or an Ayodhya, could have found out right away. But you see, there was this conspiracy of putting the blame on Advani, on the BJP leadership, so they didn't want to know anything more. Nothing should detract from this, designation of Advani as the guilty man. So, they can still do their job after all these years.
So it was, as you mentioned, a time of frenzied chaos.
Yes.
And the conspiracy was already brewing. So who was behind it, in your opinion?
Who was behind what?
This entire conspiracy thing. For instance, is it only the government, the incumbent government back then? Or was there a different lobby, a different setup, a different left-leaning mechanism that was behind this portrayal of Advani and RSS as the perpetrators of this act?
Well, you see, that was the media. I mean, the media at the time were very pro-secularist. It was not the government. Or, I mean, some people in the Congress party that was in power at the time would have been in it. People like Mani Shankar Iyer, like Kapil Sibal and stuff. Not Narasingha Rao, because, I mean, all this was happening below him. He didn't have to do anything. All this was already happening. So what counted for him as a Congress leader was that this would put the BJP on the defensive. This allowed him to sack the 4 BJP state governments. And on the whole, you see their position in publicity, in advertising was compromised. They didn't know what face exactly to give themselves. Because if they had been strongly behind the movement, then they could have taken that face. That would have chased certain voters away, it would have attracted others. But so it was a credible position. Or they could simply have disowned the whole thing, but that to attract the pro-Hindu votes would be difficult. So, the whole thing was a mess for the BJP. So that was very much to Narasimha Rao's liking. At the same time, though, Narasimha Rao was very much a Hindu. And so he wanted the temple to be built, like his predecessor Rajiv Gandhi. You see, now with Papu Gandhi, you might forget. But you see, the Congress party at that time was in favor of building the temple. And so...
Was that for political leverage in case of Rajiv Gandhi? Or maybe he was genuinely willing to
Well, one thing is that, you see, at that time, Congress was the party that tried to be all things unto all men. Today, it's strongly a pro-minority party where, even top people like Rajiv Gandhi can afford to be very openly anti-Hindu, to say that the Manusmriti preaches rape and stuff like that, whereas it gives the death penalty for rape in reality. So back then, they did not take a strongly anti-Hindu stance. You see, sometimes they followed policies that by implication were anti-Hindu, but they certainly wouldn't want to be seen as anti-Hindu. And so regarding the temple, Rajiv Gandhi was in favor of building it. He himself was actually tipped to lay the first stone. It was finally the Home Minister Bhutta Singh who went to that ceremony, 9th of November 89, exactly to the day 30 years before the Supreme Court verdict in favor of the temple. So what he said was that he was in favor of deciding whether to build it or not, depending on the verdict of the historical evidence. Now, to anybody who knew the historical evidence, this was a polite way of saying, I'm in favor of the temple. Because everybody knew, of course, there has been a temple there. You see, there was this completely artificial case made by the so-called eminent historians that there had not been a temple there. Now, of course, there was a temple there. And so there had been a court case in 1885-86 where all the parties concerned, the local Muslims, the local Hindus, the British judge, all agreed that, yes, of course, there had been a temple there which had forcibly had to make way for a mosque. And so that fact was not being doubted. It's only the consequences. What consequence should be given to this in law? And so the British judge said, well, yeah, it's a sorry thing that this happened, but since it is already so many years ago, it's no use raking it up now. So that was his position. You can take another position, but at any rate, the fact of the temple, that was universally recognized. And there was no reason at all for the eminent historians to put that in doubt. That's what you do when you have new evidence. And there was no such new evidence. So, that wasn't necessary. So, you see, when Rajiv Gandhi said, okay, it has to depend on the historical evidence, this is a way of saying, I'm in favor of rebuilding the temple. Now, there was one practical hurdle. It was the physical structure of the mosque. And so, from the viewpoint of Narasingha Rao, who was in favor again of building the temple, it came in handy that somebody else did this dirty work. Because, after all, to demolish it, one thing you can do is to move the mosque. That was effectively a proposal, like the Abu Simbel temple in Egypt, when a dam was built there. So that temple had to be moved, and it was moved. So with modern technology, this is fairly feasible. So that was a possibility. Failing that, it would be demolished. And so if the Karsevaks wanted to do that, well, so much the better for Narasingha Rao. He didn't have to do it. He wouldn't get the blame for having demolished the Babri Masjid. So you see, he took an afternoon nap, and he didn't want to be disturbed, and then, he woke up when it had been demolished. And that was exactly what he wanted. So as a Hindu, he wanted the mosque to be replaced with a temple. And as a Congress leader, he wanted the BJP to be on the defensive.
That's quite a revelation, I guess, for many of the audience. Because not too many people are familiar with it. They have gone with the newspaper reports and the media, how media has portrayed it. So can you just cast some light on the role of RSS? As you mentioned that they were half-hearted in taking up responsibilities, or let's say to commit the act in the very first place. So, because many people in today's time, the RSS, wears it like a badge of pride. But back then, since you were mentioning, they were a little reluctant to go after it. So can you just cast some light on that for the audience, because that needs to be said, I guess.
Yes. Now here I go by what a number of Karsevaks have told me personally. So it's not exactly eyewitness. I was on the airplane at that time, but it comes close. And so what they told me is that on the ground where the demolition took place, RSS officers tried to stop them.
That's quite a revelation, I guess.
Yes, and one person in particular whom they mentioned was Ashok Singhal, the leader of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. He tried to stop them. He tried to persuade them. And the Karsevaks were fed up with him. And so they took his dhoti and they said, if you don't shut up, we'll pull it off. And so some more RSS officers, had been deputed to that role, but there was no use. The enthusiasm was such that they could easily overcome those few hurdles. And so they stormed the mosque and they demolished it.
So it was more like Congress played a very smart move by letting BJP do their work, and at the same time polarizing the Hindu votes in favor of them. So that's your stance, I guess, on that. Okay, that's I think the audience will be very well, you can say, enlightened by these great facts that you were sharing. So, that was the background back then. Now I must ask you this, because you are somewhere in between. You are not in the Congress, you are not in the BJP camp. You are somewhere, you are coming from abroad, and you are coming here as a historian, or let's say as a scholar. So how did both these camps view you to be?
I don't know. You see, at the time I was writing my PhD on the political Hindu movement, and so the BJP leadership at that time knew my face because I often came in their office and interviewed people. I was even allowed a few times to sit in on their meetings. So they knew me, but otherwise I don't know exactly what they thought. They must have thought it quite bizarre. But I had something going for me. I had written a book on the Ram Janmabhoomi affair that was published in 1990. And so that book they liked. You see, even though it was nothing special. It was a journalistic account of just what was happening. And I did, of course, support the temple thesis. Yeah, of course there was a temple there. Rather easy to find out.
True.
And so that they liked very much. And indeed, you see that book together with Sitaram Goel's list of 1840 or something demolished temples. These two books were presented at a press conference by L.K. Advani, presided over by Girilal Jain, the former editor of the Times of India.
Okay, so maybe some people viewed you as a meddlesome person, and some people, let's say, in the RSS camp, they espoused your views, which was obvious. But back then, because you were young, I guess, 30 years ago, you were quite young, and you were new here.
Yeah.
And so just wanted to know if how the situation from a foreigner's perspective was there, because when we talk about this issue, this had become a global issue back then.
Well, as for Congress, you see, at that time I didn't really take any position vis-a-vis Congress. But you see, Congress then had a somewhat, complex position also, in the sense that today, you see, they pretend to be, anti-Hindu, or they don't say anti-Hindu, but they take positions that can only be interpreted as anti-Hindu. And back then it was not like that. And so it's not like the BJP in the last election campaign has portrayed it, that it was the BJP that was in favor of the temple and Congress that was against it, and so on. And that was just not correct. So the Congress at that time was, took a nuanced position and was rather in favor of building the temple, but making sure that nothing untoward happened to the Muslim position. So what Rajiv Gandhi wanted was to get the temple built, but meanwhile, give a few sweeteners to the Muslim leadership. And so it's in that context that you should see the Shah Bano judgment, or the law overruling the court judgment. So where against the earlier law, the new law would confirm the Sharia in matters of Muslim divorce, or the banning of the Salman Rushdie book, which I have seen just last week, is right now perfectly available in India.
The Satanic Verses is...
The Satanic Verses is very much available. So back then it wasn't. And so the banning of that book was also one of the sweeteners for the Muslim leadership that would come in turn in exchange for allowing the Hindus to build their temple.
So the way you are, reflecting on that issue, it seems to me like the situation was very bizarre. No one was truly fighting for the Hindu cause, I guess. So who were these people, the Kursevaks, who stood up and who protected their faith or their beliefs, I guess? So who were these people?
A
So we
good
must.
book could be written about that. You see, go back, trace these people and interview them, and somebody should do that. I'm not going to do it, but yeah, it's important. Well, my impression. So some of them were organized. There was the Bajrang Dal at that time, the sort of youth movement of the
That's more of an
Vishwa Hindu
RSS
Parishad.
outfit.
Yes, exactly. The RSS again at that time was different souls in one body. Within the BJP, at that time it was still a Hindu party, but still with doubts, with ifs and buts. RSS, same thing. So you had strongly pro-Hindu leaders also regarding the temple. But again, it was wishy-washy. And so today, of course, that has all become far more extreme. There's not much Hindu anymore about either the BJP or the RSS. And so it's only in the elections that suddenly they put up a Hindu face, and then they try to say, oh yeah, and Congress is very much anti-Hindu. Maybe today it is, but back then it certainly wasn't. And you cannot understand the whole Ayodhya affair if you try to put it that way. I'd say on the contrary. You see, the Ayodhya liberation movement was started in 83 by Mahanta Vaidyanath of the Hindu Mahasabha, the personal guru of Yogi Adityanath, who did not originally come from the RSS BJP, together with a few congressmen, including the ex-prime minister Gulzari Lal Nanda. So not just anyone. And so it is those people who started the movement and the BJP who jumped on the bandwagon in 1989. And so you could say that they judged wisely because they certainly profited. You see, they had 2 seats in parliament, and then in the elections of 1989, after embracing the Ayodhya cause, they had 86 seats, and then in 1991 they had, I think, 120 seats. So they certainly reaped the harvest of the Ayodhya affair. And then after these elections in 1991, they dropped the whole thing like a hot potato. And that's also one of the reasons why the demolition happened. You see, the Karsevaks were very disappointed. They were disappointed in the Supreme Court, which had, I don't know if they had formally promised, they certainly had let on that they were going to pass a judgment before the gathering in Ayodhya on 6 December. And the second reason why they were disappointed was in the BJP. So the BJP was calling them to Ayodhya, was going to do a big show in Ayodhya, but nothing concrete, nothing tangible. They were not going to demolish the temple, the mosque, I'm sorry. And so partly because of this disappointment, they had the energy, the determination, we are going to do it.
So maybe we can take a moment and pay our homage to the departed souls, the souls of the Karsevaks, who who stood up on their ground and who stood for their faith in the Sanatana Dharma. So maybe we can take a moment to appreciate their efforts. Maybe they have been exploited, or let's say their efforts have been in other ways succumb to other people, other manifestos and all, but we can definitely take a moment to pay homage to them. So coming back.
Well, let me first pay homage to the few that I know. The Kothari brothers from Kolkata I visited their family after they had died, and of course, there was their photograph on the wall with a banner and everything, and so they were proud of their sons, but nevertheless, when I left there, I was mainly impressed with the enormous sadness of the whole situation.
Mm.
And so the leaders of that movement should sort of, think of, was this really necessary? And so I don't think it was necessary. So you can blame Mulayam Singh Yadav, whose policeman had done the shooting.
Mm.
But the BJP is not in a position to blame him. They gave him the Bharat Ratna. They gave him an award. So they are, whatever Mulayam has done, whether it was good or not, at any rate, the BJP is very much an accomplice. And so they are in no position to blame him. At any rate, he did what in his position he had to do, keep law and order and all that. But a step before that, should the Ayodhya movement have done the things that would lead to an armed confrontation? And so I don't think so. You see, when you look at the Congress positions at that time, it seems obvious to me that an arrangement could have been worked out between BJP and Congress. Maybe at that time, the only problem would have been that the BJP would not have taken, that the Congress would not have taken the BJP serious enough. At that time, there were only 2 seats in parliament. But so once street agitation got going, maybe they would. And so something could have been worked out with a peaceful solution. And so that was not done, that was not tried. Now here, maybe I'm missing details, like in the Mahabharata, Krishna, before deciding on battle, tries, peaceful negotiations with the Kauravas. So here, maybe I am missing some episodes. Maybe they did more their best. At any rate, the way it went now was exactly to their liking as a political calculation. This got them votes. And so this has long-term consequences because the BJP became a national player thanks to the Ayodhya affair. So that catapulted them to the status of the official opposition party. And so that brought them in a position of then coming to power. So, at least they should be very explicitly grateful to the people who fell for Ayodhya. And the people who worked for Ayodhya.
Absolutely. And it is perhaps because of their hard-striven efforts that today we have the Ram temple over there. But
well, strictly speaking, though, you see, I've seen all these, BJP devotees, Modi devotees saying, oh, it is thanks to the BJP that we have the temple and so on. I'm not too sure of that. You see, it's mainly the courts and so the lawyers who, defended Ayodhya in court. And the main argument that they could use, and here I don't want to sound like praising my own side, but it is a fact that the court case was won because of the historical evidence. And so it is mainly the historians who have done that job.
No doubt. But, the ground was also paved by them in that sense, because they brought this issue. Anyways, if we come to that case, it's a very peculiar instance in history of, judgments laid out by the Supreme Court. The judgment says that, the judgment is in favor of the Ram Janmabhoomi cause. But at the same time, this case cannot be extrapolated as an instance and applied to other cases on conflicted religious territories. So on one hand you got what you wanted, but then again you can't really use that case as a justification for your temple restoration project in afterwards. So where does that finally leave us, the
Yes.
verdict? Yes.
Okay. Well, you are referring to the Places of Worship Act that Narasingha Rao enacted like almost immediately upon coming to power in 1991. And that was also part of this game of, giving some sweeteners to the Muslim side in order to make the road free for the Hindu temple construction. Just like the Shah Banu affair and so on earlier under Rajiv Gandhi. So he wanted to reassure the Muslim leadership, okay, there is now the issue about Ayodhya, but that doesn't mean that any of your other mosques are going to be threatened. So some people say this was very fair, very unfair of Narasingha Rao. I think it's just part of a strategy.
But this same cause has been reiterated by the Supreme Court while delivering this verdict on this case. That okay, fine, this case is going in favor of the Ram Janmabhoomi cause, but you can't really cite it as an example because citations are required for court procedures. They cite these cases and that cases, and referring to them, they build their judgments. So this explicitly mentioned that you can't really use this case as an instance to deal with other cases, for instance Gyanbapi or Mathura and some other cases.
Yeah, legality is such that there happens to exist a law that gives the Ayodhya case a very special place, accepting it from whatever the arrangement is for all the other temples. And so effectively all the other temples still are frozen, and so their status cannot be changed. So if you do want to change it, what you can do is change the law. The BJP has had a comfortable majority for 10 years. It could have changed that law. It has chosen not to do so. So if you want to blame anyone, well, there is a government that you can blame. So right now the situation still is that all these other temples are frozen. Nevertheless, there have been a few court cases that have gone in the direction of rebuilding the temple in those places also. So you have had some surprises in the case of the Krishna Janmabhoomi temple. And then you have the very straightforward case of the Kashi Vishwanath.
Gyanbapi Mosque.
So you see there, it is totally clear that that was a temple. Aurangzeb made no secret of it.
True.
On the contrary, this was an Islamic procedure of showing off the victory over infidelism by, leaving a few pieces of the demolished temple visible so that everybody could see the victory of Islam. Like Mahmud Ghaznavi did the same thing. In the case of the Krishna Janmabhoomi, specifically. So in the case of Kashi, it's totally obvious. And the question then is, what should be done with it? Now, in the case of Kashi and Mathura, I tend to go along with the Vishwanu Parishad, which at the time of the Ayodhya affair took as its position, we only want 3 temples. And so I think given the importance of those places of pilgrimage, I think it's fair that they become Hindu temples. But on the whole, I'm not at all in favor of, opening every temple case. I mean, that's the wrong focus, you see. That's first of all, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look generous. It doesn't look noble. It's petty. But yeah, strictly speaking, of course, these are temples that have been stolen from Hindus. And so you could make a case that they should be given back. However, I think that these temples are only an outer embodiment of the general Islamic policy against infidelism, against paganism, and that a far more important dimension than these stone buildings is the souls of the people that they have abducted from Sanatana Dharma, namely all the people who have been forced to become Muslim. So, and forced to become Muslim, that in some cases means with a knife on the throat.
Absolutely.
There are many people who have been enslaved, and so in their situation could not but become Muslim. But then there are far more cases of people who have been converted under, let's say, social pressure. Like the classic cases, if you have a court case against your neighbor, you know, you're a shopkeeper, he's a shopkeeper, and I don't know, the apples from your tree fall in his garden or so, you know, you can win your trial by converting. That was the system at the time. If there's a trial between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, it's automatically the Muslim who wins. So there has been a lot of social pressure that has caused many Hindus to become Muslim. Now, I think that that is a far more serious matter than these temple buildings. So, you know, in the late 19th century, there was the Arya Samaj with its policy of Shuddhi, purification, which meant reconversion of Indian Muslims to Hinduism. Today they call it Gharvapasi. Not that there's much of a policy of Gharvapasi, but yeah, once in a while you have some village or so that collectively reconverts to Hinduism. So if that policy goes somewhere, then one day those people are going to bring back their places of worship. You know, they are going to turn mosques into temples. And that's what you should go for.
That's a bigger cause,
That's
I
a
guess.
bigger cause, and that's a nobler cause.
Nobler cause.
You see, you should get those buildings peacefully back.
Since you are mentioning, you know, getting those buildings peacefully back, so can there be an appeal from the Hindu side to the Muslim community, you know, just to hand over certain lands that we consider auspicious and we, you know, consider them as a very part of our history, our culture. So, you know, it's very naive. I understand it's very naive too, but, you know, to some extent, just to get a harmonized society. So can we make, and, you know, since the Muslim population is largely in this case, you know, misled by their own people just to leverage political outputs, so can we make an appeal, and that appeal should only be from the Enlightenment front, that look, this is the historical facts, and that these are the aspects that you can do because you are the scholars. So if you come on front and say, look, these are historical facts, and if you just want to, you know, coexist in harmonious way, you know, you can just, you know, give them certain pieces of land, and in return you can have harmony within your own, and you can establish a larger Indian brotherhood. So how do you see that?
Well, this all reminds me of some Hindu conference in Houston, Texas, organized by Rajiv Verma, you know, a very important Hindu activist over there.
Rajiv Malhotra ji?
No, Rajiv Verma, another Rajiv.
Okay.
And so there was some speaker who was very Hindu influenced, but you see his discipline, strictly speaking, was some some American psychotherapy or something. And so we had to, 2 by 2, do an exercise. Namely, we had to get something from the other person. Don't remember which object it was. Anyway, so we had to get that, and we had to use all kinds of tricks to get that. And then at the end of the exercise, he said, now, how many of you have simply asked their neighbor for this object? You see, rather than acquiring it, you can just ask. It's very simple. Yeah, I must confess I hadn't thought of that. And neither had anyone else I there had. But here in this case, of course, it's absurdly simple. I hadn't thought of that. So suppose Hindus just ask Muslims, hey, why don't you give us the Kashi Vishwanath back? And all these other thousands of temples, okay?
If not all the temples, at least the places that we consider very consecrate to our culture.
Yeah, that's an idea. Yes, they should try that.
From the scholarly community, that can be an appeal. Although I'm not sure if it will work out or not. Maybe not, but still, as an academic exercise or as a scholarly exercise, at least we should make an appeal, I guess. So
yeah, and now you come to mention it. I don't want to be too prejudiced against this. I mean, I feel a certain skepticism coming up. But maybe it'll work. Yeah, let's try. However, appealing to real Islam, you've been hoodwinked. The mullahs, they have fooled you, telling you that you have these mosques, and no, I'm afraid that is too easy. You see, if you care for Islam, of course you don't have to, but if you care for Islam, then these pagan temples have been impounded by Islam rightfully. And so it is very good to prevent people from worshipping idols. It's far better that they gather in a mosque and pray without any idols to the one and only God, Allah, and that's the real Islam. Nobody has been hoodwinked. On the contrary, you see those who insist that this is not the real Islam. You see, the Prophet would have been in favor of these Hindu temples and so on. Nonsense. That's you see, the Prophet himself, when he conquered Mecca, he went to the Kaaba. There were 360 idols there. And he destroyed these idols with his own hands. And so throughout Muslim history, you see, conquerors who did that, who destroyed Hindu temples, always give us justification, the precedent behavior of Muhammad. So I don't know if you can overrule that.
Even in a democratic setup where people are being educated at universities, still you don't see any hope in this practice.
But democracy is un-Islamic. Now, I admit that a certain evolution ought to be possible in Catholicism, which I know from the inside. The church used to be against democracy. And in the 19th century, in fact, Belgium, for the church, was the exception. You see, liberalism, liberal ideas, they disapproved of. They were in favor of the restoration, you see, of the Austrian Empire and all those monarchies. And they made an exception for Belgium, so the Pope, ruled that, liberalism is to be condemned, except in Belgium. See? But on the whole, the church was against that. And so they evolved. And in the 20th century, you got Christian democracy, where they became, favorable to democracy. So in that sense, strictly speaking, you see, in Islam, you could expect that. But still, I am sure that many clerics are going to uphold the Islamic tradition, which has no place for democracy.
So ultimately, the tradition and the appeal from the Islamic preachers, that would undermine this cause. That's what you were trying to say. This practice.
Well, the speeches are only expressive of Orthodox Islamic theology. So you see, of course, the Prophet's own example in Mecca merely establishes what henceforth the correct Islamic practice was going to be. So, of course, you see no room for idol temples.
So maybe we can think of that exercise in some remote idealism, but
well, then again, you see, the thing is that Muslims are first of all just people, and so they are open to other influences than just Islam. And so here I would take heart from evolutions in Arabia. You see, already a Hindu temple has come up in the United Arab Emirates. There's another one coming up in Saudi Arabia. Even though the Prophet himself has laid down that on the Arab Peninsula, not one idol temple is allowed. I'm sure that they also, you see, politely ignore what little few Christian places of worship exist, for their Filipina maids and, for guest labor. And so the situation of Hindus there is the same. There are so many Hindus that are just necessary to the economy of the Emirates, of Qatar, of Oman, and so on, that, ultimately they do give in. So in that sense, you see that evolution is not impossible among Indian Muslims too, though I would caution that a big difference is that in Arabia, the Muslims are very sure of their position. They are in control. And so they concede as much space to non-Muslims as they choose. Whereas in India, there is this constant polarization, and they feel they are a minority and they feel besieged and so on. And so therefore, they are much less inclined to make any concessions.
And, these polemical claims that these prophets made, and the preachers also, they espoused it. I somehow think that the historians in India, they have somehow, I don't know how, but they have somehow found a way to espouse those ideals and, to take side with them. We have Irfan Habib, Romila Thapa, and historians like them, like Ramachandra Guha to some extent. These people have always taken the side of, the fanatic preachers rather than stating the truth. I mean, what could be the reason, in your opinion?
Well, they are not in favor of fundamentalist Islam, like Irfan Habib, as a Marxist, as an outspoken Marxist, has criticized religious Islam. Nevertheless, he has defended the mosque against the temple, and even claimed that a stone slab with a text testifying to the Rama temple there. You see, he has denied its existence. He has tried to claim that it was stolen from a museum and brought there and so on. So this has all been laid to rest. Meenakshi Jain has written all the detail about it. So, I mean, I don't really like his position, but there is a certain consistency to his position in the sense that him as originally Muslim or Romila Thapar as originally a Hindu, they are most of all secularists, Marxists as it happens, but secularists. And they, well, I won't say they hate, of very many people. You can simply identify that emotion, they hate. But okay, for scholars of their level, I will not impute hate to them, but they are against the political Hindu movement. I'd say they are against Hinduism, but maybe that's too much to say. At any rate, they are against the political Hindu movement. And so that has certain implications. So when there is a polarized issue like Ayodhya, then they choose sides against the Hindu side. And so that makes them bedfellows of Syed Shahabuddin and people like that.
So it's more like, Muslims for Muslims, Hindus for Hindus, seculars for Muslims as well. So
Yes, of course.
That's how it has been.
And not always Muslims for Muslims. One of the most important archaeologists in this matter was K.K. Mohammed. So he strongly testified in favor of the temple.
Absolutely.
He
He
saw the temple remains with his own eyes.
So he is one of the pioneers in this movement, along with you and many other people. So as we were talking about these historians, Marxist historians like Thapar and Habib, so they always tend to favor the Islamic cause, despite being theoretically or theologically to say against the dogmatic Islam and all. But whenever the cases that subscribe to Hindu cause appear, they tend to side with the other party. So the reason, as I was once again asking, is it that somewhere down the line they are blatantly Hindu-phobic for some weird reason we can't really determine?
Well, they are against whatever counts as the right. I mean, in Europe, you have the same position. You see media, academics mostly are in favor of Islam because they are against whatever they deem the right. Conservative Christians, you see right-wingers in general. So they know that those people wouldn't like to see an Arab face, as the mayor, as the prime minister, whatever. So they are in favor of those. And it's not very deep. So for them, Muslims are the good guys because others have criticism of them, so they must be the good guys. So here it's the same thing. They know that they are against Hinduism and certainly against the political Hindu movement. And therefore, anyone who is against them is good. So they are in favor of the Muslims, they are in favor of the Christians whenever, whatever the case may be.
But mostly pro-Muslim, so to say.
Well, that's
Mostly.
what you hear most about.
Maybe because of the circumstances that they are trying to fit in into that spectrum of political correctness, I guess.
Well, it goes back to Nehru. Part of it has to do with Nehru's own personality. I mean, he himself, you see, he described himself as being Hindu only by accident of birth.
By birth.
You see, being English by upbringing and Muslim by culture. his language was Urdu. And so ever since, you see, all the Nehruvians have had the same inclination. Yeah.
And since we are talking about historians, the obvious question comes that how the Ayodhya verdict and the establishment of the Ram temple would be written down in history textbooks afterwards. So how do you think, and how the cause has been represented in history books previously, how it is being written at present, and how do you think in future it will be communicated to the people?
I must say I have not recently checked what happened to it in the history textbooks. That's indeed most interesting. What have they made of it? Yeah. The BJP, of course, tries to claim as much credit for itself as possible. So all the devotees, have been clamoring that, Hindus would never have had this temple if it wasn't for the BJP, which I think is doubtful. But yeah, I mean, they have a certain merit. In fact, I'll pin down the merit on the one thing where they have merit. When the Uttar Pradesh High Court had given its verdict in favor of the temple, then it landed on the desk of the Supreme Court. And you see, to some extent, the Supreme Court is bound by what the lower court has already given as verdict. And it may be something else if they find new evidence, but that was not the case. On the contrary, ever more evidence was coming to light in favor of the temple, even when they didn't look for it. And so the one thing they could do as a hotbed of secularism, as not very inclined to allow the temple to come up, is simply to postpone. This is something that Indian judges are extremely good at. You see, the whole Ayodhya court case has lasted 69 years. Okay? So a few of those years, are due to the Supreme Court. And so the BJP law minister, pulled them up and said, now come on, get to work on this court case. So that's good. That's one thing they've done. But otherwise, it was just under the court. And so the court itself decided in favor of the temple because they had no option left. They could hardly go against the temple after this much evidence had accumulated.
So how do you see this event overall in the, so to say, academic framework? And when we talk about academic framework, obviously the textbooks that most students are going to read. So where do you think this event will be framed? Are they being adequately and justifiably being represented in the textbook?
Well, I'll start with what Sitaram Goel commented on it in 1990. Namely, the whole movement for Ayodhya has got bogged down on the question of that particular temple. Whereas the real question raised by this issue is the whole system behind this. You see, why was this particular temple destroyed? In fact, it was a practice that hit thousands of temples, and also outside India. Also before Islam came in India, it was already destroying temples or churches in West Asia, in North Africa. And so what happened in India was simply an application of that. And so that question has not been asked at all. You see the BJP itself avoiding that question. Like, and this is not the first time I say it, but it's very apt here to bring it up. It was said at the time that Rama was an Indian hero and Babri was a foreign invader. Well, you see that foreignness has nothing to do with it. you see, the Greeks with Alexander, they came into India, or at least, the margin of India, and they did not destroy temples. And you see, these Greeks became Buddhists or became Krishna worshippers, like Heliodorus, like Menander, in India known as Milinda. You see, he became the topic of a Buddhist treatise. The Huns invaded India from abroad. They became Shaivas, and so on. The Kushanas became Buddhists, and they didn't destroy temples. Even the British, you see, they did a lot wrong. You see, about the economy, about the education system, they have a lot to answer for. And yet they didn't destroy temples. On the contrary, you see, they discovered a copy of the Arthashastra. They deciphered the Brahmi script. They discovered the Harappan cities, and so on. They contributed a lot to India's heritage. So foreignness was not the problem. And then you have later people like Aurangzeb, like Tipu Sultan and so on, born in India, and nevertheless temple destroyers. So the real reason is being hidden away by the BJP, namely the Islamic theology of iconoclasm. And so that's a problem you have to look squarely in the face. And so that's why Goel said, well, it's a fine thing, you can agitate for the Ayodhya temple, but if you avoid the real question, then people haven't learned anything. And, I'm not saying, we should rake up, affairs over each and every temple. That's not what Goel said. You see, whatever you do with this, you can then decide amongst yourselves. It need not be a demolition of every mosque or so. But nevertheless, the knowledge has to be there. You have to know very frankly what the problem has been. And so in that sense, you see, this, has been an interesting attempt, has been an interesting exercise, but incomplete.
So forgive, but don't forget.
Precisely. There you have it, yes. Yeah, there are many people who write on Twitter and so on, never forgive, never forget. Now here you see, even though I don't believe in Jesus and so on anymore, that's one thing that I keep carrying with me, is the value of forgiveness. And so to say, don't forgive, that is something I can't get across my lips.
So that was a brilliant session with you, sir. And I'm pretty sure the audience must have been enlightened, and they have already had so many revelations, so many new facts coming up to them. And with this, I'll conclude this session of the first podcast by the Center for Indic Studies in Indus University. And we'll keep doing such activities, and we're going to engage with you as often as we can. And thank you, Dr. Elst, for joining me for this session.
Thanks for
And I wish you health and prosperity. Thank you, sir.
Namaste.
Namaste.